this morning about the memoir as revealing details and histories of molestation and other crimes. I had a lot of difficulty, getting going on my memoirs because my family was, close members of my family were opposed to my views about my father, who was not one of the molesters, but who was closely associated with them. And my contention and my observations for years working with my father was that he belonged to a subculture, I call it the shadow world, of men who were, probably because of the culture, the camping out, the months that they used to spend away from their families, taking care of cattle or other, perhaps working in logging camps, whatever they did that took them out on the road or into camping grounds away from their families, contributed to the homosexual underculture that wives and children and daughters weren't even supposed to ever know about. So I think this is why my sisters have been so, as they didn't have a clue. I mean, they had no thought that this could be involved with my father's drinking, with his associations, which would, they just didn't think about that because it wasn't called to their attention. It was never talked about, and so it was extremely difficult for them to accept my observations, which I'd kept quiet about them for years. In fact, I started having this idea when I was 5 years old, when I was molested. This immediately catapulted me into an adult world where I had to make decisions about what to do, what was involved. And I thought that the first molester and my father were having a homosexual relationship. Well, and of course my sister was saying, well, how could you at 5 years old? Well, at 5 years old, I was having to deal with sexual activity initiated by an adult. So I had to think about adult things far more than we want most 5-year-old children to ever have to think about. But it was sort of like this made me old before my time. It was like having, and that's what molestation does to children. That's why it's so damaging. It causes them to have to think about terrible stuff that nobody wants their children to have to think about. So, and I think the memoir, I never did tell because of all that was involved in it. I just didn't see how I could possibly, it's just like people weren't going to hear this. I would have to break taboos that were just so strong that, I feared what my father would do if I started talking about his association with the molester, which I thought would cause him to be far more emotional and even murderous in dealing with him. So I didn't want a murder to happen on top of what already was. And I thought that would impact the family, just something terrible. So this went on and on for years. And I think that when the law doesn't get involved, and even if it does, it can deal with certain aspects. It can put the molester away through a trial and this is what I think needs to happen. This needs to happen when there's a pedophile preying on children and teens But sometimes this isn't possible. And then I think the memoir becomes very important. People have to tell their stories. They have to try to educate the world about what they need to look out for. Now, I just got through reading a very impressive memoir called My Father's Love by Sharon Doubiago of San Francisco. My sister sent it to me, and she talks about a very difficult molestation of a daughter by a father. Well, when she writes her memoir, which she does, even after a lot of opposition, a lot of, great difficulty, she writes a memoir and she studies her father's people and her mother's people, trying to determine, how this all happened, how her father committed such a terrible crime, because his crime was very violent, on her. And she thinks her sister too. So this memoir, My Father's Love, is invaluable in trying to teach us about incest and why people cross lines, why parents cross lines, why people out there in the neighborhoods break all these laws and cross the line into molestation, into victimizing children. Why? What happens? What is their history? And we've been able to find some valuable things out just by people writing their histories and investigating and doing research, that a lot of times this is generational, that the molester was molested so many times. That happens. That molester will then turn around and do what was done to them. I looked at my father's, in fact, I had a gay guy who was openly gay and had lived this way for years tell me that he thought most gays were molested into it, as he was, as a child. Now, this was a shocking statement by him, and I thought that he should write his story. Because he had been doing a lot of thinking about what happened. And so it's like all the people. Now, my memoirs, I'm going to post in my blog, as well as try to publish them when they're done. But this is a service that I feel like I need to do for other children, other parents, to just write my story and all the things that conclusions I came to and what I thought about. So I urge everyone who has a story to tell, not to let it go without being told. Just tell it, which is what I'm doing.